we think about marketing and sales as being two different languages, then you can think about comms and e-commerce as being like not just different languages, but different buildings, different campuses, different countries in some cases. Everything is so fragmented right now, and that really, it leaves a really interesting opportunity for the smaller agencies, for the smaller brands that have tinier teams, that have broader remits, to actually be able to activate things, because in a startup brand, your PR person is your e-commerce person.
Welcome to eCommerce Deep Dive, the show where we explore e-commerce business strategy and the future of shopping online. Your host is John Giorso, founder and CEO of Orca Pacific, a full-service agency dedicated to growing brands on Amazon. Every week, John talks shop with the biggest players in retail and e-commerce. Today, we have Kris McDermott, Director of Shopper Marketing at Kimberly-Clark. In their conversation, the two discuss the integration of e-commerce with PR and the future of influencers in online retail. Thanks for listening and enjoy the show.
Kris, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
So it would be great to start with a little bit on your background and what you're up to today.
Sure. So my background is in the agency life. So I worked in performance marketing for a long time, lived in the Omnicom Media Group family for a little over a decade, worked in client service, and then I kind of made a transition into cross-functional work, going into like the commerce side of things. So basically, having worked with CPG clients in performance, saying I think there's a need for us to build out a capability that's much broader and not just in search or social or programmatic, but everything. So then I did that role working across all of the Omnicom Media Group and shopper groups to try and make sure that we could actually bring commerce to our clients. And then for the past 2 years, I was at Edelman, so working within their digital capabilities to build out e-commerce across analytics, creative, consulting, anything basically driving sales online. I was the one-stop shop for that. And then as of last Monday, I have transitioned to finally go client side. I am leading the shopper marketing for Kimberly-Clark for their digital first retailers. So Wal-Mart, Target, InstaCart, Shipt, emerging capabilities, Sam's Club, all those kind of guys.
Awesome. I know we were talking about this before the show a little bit, but I think this kind of intersection or sometimes lack thereof between PR, influencers, communications, and e-commerce is, I would say, something that's generally sort of underappreciated by the industry. I think it's probably even underappreciated by the big players, by Amazon included. What are your thoughts? Like, where do you think this is today? Where do you think it's headed?
I mean, I think that the analogy I frequently use is that, like, okay, so if we think about marketing and sales as being two different languages, then you can think about comms and e-commerce as being like not just different languages, but different buildings, different campuses, different countries in some cases. So even though you have, people who are smart and trying to all function on behalf of a business, their particular remits are so siloed still. And I mean, we use the word siloed every day, a million times a day. Oh, too much, but I think for a good reason, is that everything is so fragmented right now, and that really, it leaves a really interesting opportunity for the smaller agencies, for the smaller brands that have tinier teams, that have broader remits, to actually be able to activate things, because in a startup brand, your PR person is your e-commerce person. So it's not like you have, even within the bigger your organization gets, it's like, well, that's not just your PR department, but you've got someone whose entire job is one tiny bit of PR. So if that's your client as an agency, you can't even get them to talk about things outside of PR, let alone, things outside of comms, let alone outside of, as that world gets so broad.
Do you think it's important eventually, or maybe long-term, that these two pieces are connected? And I guess if so, why?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's critically important. I think there's a few reasons. The first is that consumers don't care about what part of your company put out a message. They don't care about, it's not like they say, and now I've become a shopper marketing customer, so I'm just going to make sure that I click over to a retailer, and I want to make sure it's not a branding message. Like a person just experiences media, especially now in a world where someone is exposed to so many messages and we see duplication of efforts, and your reach and frequency is so condensed because they're only on 5 or 6 platforms in a given day. So I think it matters in terms of the person is the same, but also like the clients are becoming the same in a lot of cases. And as budgets shrink, as headcounts shrink, A marketing person might have taken on comms responsibilities. In some cases, sales might report up into marketing, and depending on how advanced that marketing organization is, they might think e-commerce is part of it too. I mean, e-commerce in a lot of places is, I used to call it the platypus of the organization, where you're a little bit this and a little bit this.
Yeah.
And in some cases, I've seen them roll up into like more of a chief communications officer. Like, who would have ever thought that happens? But if they don't even speak the same language, yeah, that's a problem.
Yeah. Interesting. So, have you seen any examples of brands actually figuring this out and doing a good job of it? I mean, you talked a little bit about kind of smaller digital native brands, and you don't have to name names, but I'm just curious, is there a case study in how to do this the right way, how to think about how PR comms influences e-commerce, or frankly, maybe the other way around?
A case study, and well, I would say that in general, when you're trying to look to who's doing things right digitally, look smaller. If you're trying to reduce the amount of time that you spend looking, there are certainly pockets, I think, of large companies that do it well, but they also tend to be the smaller brands within the portfolio who are more nimble, who are more flexible, who have less money to work with, so they are smarter with how they spend it. Especially, as CPGs are acquiring D2C companies, I always say, like, if you want to see why they're acquiring them, find what they've done right, and then you'll start to see whatever they've done right replicated across the organization. I think, and there are pockets, I think, of really, really big companies doing really smart things with integration, especially like, one of the easiest ways you can start to integrate PR and e-commerce, or at least start to get those worlds to speak together, is when you're doing like limited time offers. So how do you bring the right people in up front? If you're going to be launching a limited time offer of a cookie, for example, okay, well, how are you going to be selling it? Are you selling it D2C? Because, I've been in meetings before where they're like, well, we're just going to launch a website and we'll sell it there. And you're like, that's probably not a great use of our time and money and effort. Maybe we should use our existing retail partnerships. And so much, I think, of success in this world is just about making sure that the right people are in the room at the beginning. So making sure you have enough people who have like a minor degree in one of the other disciplines to make sure they really know their thing, but they know just enough to flag, like, actually, we should get someone from sales in because we have one retailer who's specifically asking for tests that might be able to activate this on. Or, they just start to think, actually, I'm on the softball team with this other guy who's trying to do this one thing. Let's bring him in. And I think that's where you start to see like really interesting integrated efforts, in many cases, in spite of an organizational design and not because of it. And I think that's going to be, I think it's changing because it has to. I mean, for these companies to evolve and to survive, they have to be more integrated, like not just in a like on paper way, but in a very real way.
Hey everyone, John Giorso here. I hope you're enjoying the podcast so far. I wanted to let you know that this episode has been brought to you by Orca Pacific, the agency I founded to help brands succeed on the Amazon platform. If you need any services that relate to success on the platform, whether it be content, advertising, SEO, help on the back end when it comes to operational support, etc., feel free to reach out to our team. The best way to get in touch with us is on LinkedIn. And with that, we'll get back to the show. Do you see other e-commerce platforms, other meaning not Amazon, starting to make efforts to work more closely with either PR comms teams at brands or to work directly with influencers? Are there any interesting examples of that happening? Because I know there's a couple on the Amazon front, which I'm happy to get into there. But like, are there any? Is Walmart.com, Target? These folks have traditionally done a pretty good job, in their brick and mortar landscape of working with various influencers. But is that happening online? Are you starting to see anything interesting there?
Yeah, I mean, I think Walmart especially, I always tell people don't sleep on Walmart, like right now especially. The past few months, I think, have been pretty incredible in terms of the dollars they've put behind the infrastructure to compete. I can't speak specifically to their influencer activation because that's just not something I'm super aware of, but I mean, in many cases, what I think retailers are doing that sounds really smart to me is taking the same lessons they learned from affiliates back in the day and trying to apply them to influencer, to say, okay, we essentially we have the infrastructure to drive inbound links and give commissions, but how can we do this in a more brand centric, smart way where we're actually trying to build partnerships with these people? Because the pipes are there. That's really the thing. I mean, Amazon struggles with it too. How do you make sure that you connect sales to an activation? It exists in a lot of places, especially like in shopper marketing when they have emails and that kind of stuff. Like brand marketers don't traditionally use those tools, but they could if they just knew to check the box when they were activating in the right way. So I think that Walmart is especially, I mean, they're launching all kinds of stuff all the time, testing new, especially with their private labels and trying to clearly, segment out different parts of the population. I'm very curious to see where they go.
Yeah, interesting. Do you have any thoughts around influencer created content on e-commerce platforms?
What kind of thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just like I see this as an interesting, maybe kind of future state, something that Amazon has played around with a little bit with Amazon Posts and a few other things they're doing. I think so much big brands even still struggle to come up with really highly contextual content across their catalog. If they have 3,000 items, how do you come up with 8 images? How do you come up with, video, et cetera, for 3,000 different items?
Yeah.
Well, you go on Instagram and you search their brand and all that content is there.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's there because you've had all these different influencers and if they've gone behind that in a major way, that content exists there. But then you go on Amazon and you have, one 30-second video that talks about the brand, but is not contextual at all to the specific item because that's all you could kind of figure out how to do. And then you listed that on, 3,000 different detail pages, but it's just talking about the brand. And like from a consumer perspective, that's not really that valuable. Like what they're really looking for is, okay, like I get the brand is cool and there's heritage and maybe that's interesting. But what I really want to know is like, I want someone to demo the product for 30 seconds, or
right.
use it in real life. So, yeah.
No, I think that kind of content is invaluable. I don't know that. I mean, I have to be fair. I haven't done a deep dive into who I think is doing it best, but I mean, I would say it's certainly not widespread right now in terms of utilizing really, really high quality influencer content to tell the story of, to your point, about a product and not just a general product family, but a very specific item to say, okay, especially if you start to get into these really complex categories of like electronics or that kind of stuff where it's like a very small tweak makes a big difference in the actual usage of the product. I don't know that, I mean, there are certainly a number of networks that pitch that constantly. I mean, a lot of influencer networks are constantly going out and saying like, listen, we can help you build product content that you could use on platform. Yeah. I'm not sure that most brands are yet because I think they're still trying to figure out governance and how to QA it and how to, and how to do this at scale. Again, that's part of why I think that like the D2C startups of the world are so smart because they get these really funny and interesting product usage videos that then function as brand messages as well. So you've got, it's like you can use this for any number of different things. I mean, I think that we're going to get to a world where as creative agencies scopes get cut over and over again, and, we're trying to realize that now we need the sheer number of assets that you need in an e-commerce world is so much, it's exponentially larger than it used to be.
Yeah.
I think they're going to have to figure out how to outsource it. And it would make sense to me to do it with a really highly vetted influencer program to make it really valuable. But again, I mean, to that point, then it's not going to be automated so much as it's going to be about vetting. Like the job is not going to be for a brand to create the content, but to vet it and to monitor it and to make sure that there's tools in place to keep track of it all and to repurpose it and, slice and dice as necessary.
Yeah, that's interesting to think about it like from I guess a media perspective. Like it's like the production is happening. Basically, it's already happening. It's really about the distribution and quality assurance, post production, whatever you want to call it. I mean, can you just dive into that a little bit more? You mentioned governance, some other things. I mean, just curious to hear maybe more specifics there in terms of what's not working, or what has to be fixed before this can really be done.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've seen any number of influencers gone wrong. I mean, in the past couple of years of brands saying, "Here's a product, just play with it and post to your channels," and like
Sure.
That doesn't exist anymore, right? Because now we've seen what negative
Yeah, it's too risky.
Yeah, it's a huge risk.
Yeah.
But in terms of, the governance, so building pipelines in place to say, okay, so we need to make it as seamless as possible for an influencer to create the content, upload it, have it go through a certain set of reviews. Maybe the first one is automated where it just flags to make sure there's no keywords or, any, the very basic things that we want to make sure we have. Then it goes through a human review the next round, and then it gets pushed through. Those exist today also, again, but it's mostly just to be used like on social. It's not used in a retail environment, because then there's also the opportunity for, if you could take that content, then how do you reskin it to make it fit the, the rules of what it has to be? And, we all know that there's a certain, it's got to be a certain width, a certain height, a certain length, DPI, all of this stuff is really specific. So it's like they would need to add on another layer to make it usable for a retail environment. It's not impossible at all. It's just another checklist to go through.
Yeah. Interesting. And then in that situation, does the brand at that point, once the content is produced, they typically own that? Is that the deal they have with the influencers usually?
Yeah. I mean, there's different ways to do it. There's different ways to structure an influencer relationship. But traditionally, yes, that's the whole thing, is that, I as a brand work with you as an influencer. As a brand, I then secure the rights to whatever you create.
Okay.
So I've always wondered why they don't use more of the content, quite honestly, because it's expensive, especially, and I get that, you don't always get back what you put in terms of, like, maybe you get 3 assets out of 10 that you really, really like, but there's still 3 assets that you didn't have to create.
Yeah, absolutely.
I do think there's more that's happening right now. I think there's really interesting work happening on, like, to your point of making sure you've got the right people and the shoots up front. Like, I've always wondered, like, why don't you bring influencers in when you're doing a shoot, so you can, just add it on to have them experience the product, capture it with your same beautiful, footage and high visual and graphic quality that you would be getting otherwise. And I think I think step one to that was just making sure that you had, like, a digital person when you're doing your offline shooting. So, like, it literally was making sure there was someone in the room who was like, we can't use that size on Facebook, start over. And I feel like this is a very natural extension of that job, is to say, okay, so now let's make sure we bring in other people. How can we use this in retail? So we did this whole beautiful storytelling, this wonderful for our 30-second shot that we want to make sure we use on TV. But if there's no reason you couldn't account for product stuff up front, it's just making sure, and I saw that a lot in my last job, making sure, I need one more body to be there to make sure that we have a list of shots that we want to make sure we get. So it's the same person holding it, it's the same person experiencing it. And I think there's a lot more opportunity for brands to let influencers have fun with that and really experience the product in a more authentic way. I cannot say confidently that I've ever seen a big brand do it in a super, super, authentic way, because, a lot of it reads as very scripted, and I totally understand the risks behind it, but it is a huge, huge opportunity.
Yeah, that's super interesting. The reason I'm so curious about this, I really see this gap in the market right now. Like, because I know, I can go on a brand's Instagram page and, or just search their hashtag or whatever and see all this really interesting content. Yet then, we can only go so far, like, upstream into the client, obviously, but, like, the assets then we're getting, none of those assets are there. And it's like, well, but why? Because I know you have them, and
they exist.
In most cases, you own them too.
Mm-hmm.
So then it's really a matter of, is that what you were speaking about earlier, just the disconnect then between, different parts of the organization kind of not talking to or even sharing assets with each other in some cases?
I think absolutely. And in a lot of cases it's, or maybe the deal wasn't structured in the right way. If you would have made sure that, if you would have thought about it, of the usage up front, to say, okay, we need to make sure that we are legally allowed to use this stuff in a retail environment.
Got it. Yeah. So
it's just another checkbox.
It's just, we're able to use this on our social media, but no one ever said you could use it on Amazon and Walmart.com and other places. Yeah. Right. Interesting.
And in some cases, retailers might also, depending on the nature of your relationship with your customer, being the retailer, is that they might have some pretty strong opinions about what they'll allow on the site as well. So making sure that you account for Amazon, not so much. I mean, it's much the Wild West on Amazon, but especially in the omnichannel world, I think making sure that they're brought along as part of the decision-making process and not being told after the fact, and then you try to, wedge in stuff that really kind of pushes it's very gray area in terms of what you're allowed or not allowed to have on I could see that being a political landmine.
Yeah, that's interesting too. And I think it's the way the retailers, the platforms, whatever you want to call them, how do they think about themselves? Do they
Right.
think about themselves as a retailer online, or do they think about themselves as an open platform? Amazon's really the latter for the most part, but I think even the other folks who are starting to, I think, figure this out and do have marketplaces, they still really think of themselves as retailers with buyers, with merchants, with, product people that are going to be making kind of editorial decisions there.
Right, but I think the ones that tested are going to be rewarded, because the
Yeah.
more that people can start to, if you can take advantage of the scale of the retail world outside of Amazon, the more that these people can actually play with it and say like, okay, well, how could we provide a different experience that's more personal and leverage the infrastructure, which is massive. It's just going to require I think, some testing and some holding your breath and seeing how it goes.
Yeah, sure. And I mean, again, I think one of the reasons that, digitally native brands, smaller brands are better at this is because they probably don't have, a team of 30 lawyers telling them, oh, don't do this because this might happen, or this might happen, or it has to be run through a committee, or, probably good and bad. But like, you have to be, I think, willing to accept, some failures, some test and learn, some sort of a lack of perfection.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise you'll never be able to get to a point where you can do this type of thing without having to cost 20 grand to produce every piece of content, which is the problem to begin with. Because if you were willing to go out and spend that much for a product video across 3,000 items, then you'd be fine. You just have a professionally produced video. This whole discussion wouldn't be happening in the first place. So it's that, I guess I don't want to say amateurization, but it maybe in some cases that is, apt in terms of, are you willing to have, influencers are amateurs. I mean, that's kind of that's what they're doing. Are you willing to have amateur content in place of nothing? Because
the
alternative is
a
nothing.
PR person might say democratization, not amateur, but the
much,
more
much more politically correct. Yeah, I like that.
So how do we make it, available to everyone?
Yeah.
So yes, it's not going to look, but in many cases, like professional actually gives people less of an experience. They trust it less because it doesn't feel real.
So sure.
And I mean, to be fair, an iPhone can capture content, it looks just as good as retail content would have 15 years ago. We just are so used to such high quality video and picture at this point. But I think, I don't know. I do think it speaks to the fact that those skills are in high demand. I think and very much as, with e-commerce, where people were saying, well, these jobs are drying up and that kind of thing. They're just changing. Now it's going to be about how do you put the pieces together instead of actually being the builder of the thing.
Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting. Do you think along these lines, do you think there's opportunity to have influencers directly comped on behalf of e-commerce sales at scale? I know that's worked in other channels, but I don't know if it's really working with e-commerce.
I think I'm no technical expert, so I'm sure that if I say it's certainly possible, I'm sure the people who know better would probably cringe at me saying that. But at least in theory, I don't know why it's not possible, because it's just an inbound link. Like it starts to get really complicated when you're doing multi-touch attribution. And that, if you're just talking about immediate sales, I think that should be possible. It looks a lot more complex when you're trying to drive like actual attribution of sales and that kind of stuff. I don't see why not. It would just be a matter, again, of making sure that you're plugged into the retail analytics in the right way. And that's always the $1 million question, right? To make sure that you're actually getting transparent data to actually know with certainty that that person did drive a sale or didn't drive a sale. But it would be in the retailer's best interest to share that information, because the more that you can prove that you're driving sales, the more you'll put money into doing so. That's a win-win scenario for a retailer and a brand and an influencer, because you're all working together to drive sales on a particular customer.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I know that's theoretically, or I don't know, but I would assume that's easier to do on the social platforms themselves, which is one of the reasons that I find Facebook, Instagram getting into actual commerce in a more meaningful way interesting. Is that something? Does that touch your world traditionally? Is that something that you've been paying attention to?
It's something I certainly pay attention to, just because I think it's been really interesting to watch. 5 years ago, everyone was like, Facebook commerce is going to be where it is. That's where everything. And then once they started realizing that we're just primarily not a D2C world, that, how do you actually plug in? I think in the past year, Facebook has done some really interesting integrations where they're clearly starting to identify that like the real dollars to unlock on a mass scale are the ones that are being sold in mass retailers. So figure out how to work with them. I don't think it's working yet. I mean, even when the announcement, when Instagram checkout launched and everyone got really excited, and then they read the fine print that it was only available to about 20 influencers, the ones that you always think of when you think of capital I influencers.
Yeah.
I think listen, they have to get it right. They know that, as people become more and more comfortable shopping from home, as this environment of the past 3 months has taught us, they don't want people to leave the platform. And if at any, moment they can keep them there,
Yeah.
they want to do that. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see what happens as they, again, but how does Facebook do that without showing that it prioritizes one retailer versus another? I don't know. That's not my job. I don't have to sit in those meetings, but I'm sure that that's a huge consideration, because I'm sure there are going to be some that are easier to work with than others, but they can't show preference. And especially for CPG brands that have to have fair and equitable treatment of retailers. How do you do that if only one plugs in? Does it mean you're not going to launch there? No, I would imagine, that it's not like you're not going to launch a social commerce activation, but I don't think that those original, the agreements of fair and equitable weren't actually written for digital commerce the way that it exists today. What do you do if one retailer can do something and others can't in these like really sophisticated integrations? I don't know. I imagine those are some interesting conversations in CPG lawyer rooms right now to figure out how they justify that.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, do you think the social platforms ultimately win in a significant way in commerce? I mean, beyond, do you think they become real players at some point, real competitors to Amazon, to Walmart.com, to whoever, Shopify?
Yeah. I mean, not without putting a lot of time, money into doing it. I don't think it's impossible. I think it's more a matter of, do they want to build it themselves, or do they want to partner with someone to figure out, is it going to be less painful for us to partner? If I'm Facebook and Instagram, would I rather work with Amazon to do this together and make less margin up front would it make more sense for me to build it myself, knowing that I'm gonna have to build a whole new behavior, build a whole new, like everything. It's the same thing that everyone feels about Amazon. Should I partner or should I do it myself? Yeah. Knowing that there's risks and benefits to both. I mean, I don't think Facebook's going to become a commerce destination in the same way that Amazon will.
Sure.
But weirder things have happened in the world. I feel like if you would have asked me 6 months ago if I would have thought we were at the numbers we'd be at, in terms of buying online, I would not have thought that would happen either. So
fair enough.
I'm certainly not a psychic.
Yeah. I think it's an interesting. I don't have a strong opinion on that. That's why it's an interesting question for me, because I could kind of see it going either way. I think when I think about, and Google's not social, but when I think about Google and when I think about, Facebook getting into commerce, or taking a second or third shot at really capturing share, to me, the biggest question is always, how do you do that if you're not a company that deals with physical things? If you don't deal with fulfillment centers, and you don't own product, and you're not in the game of owning physical stuff, of owning atoms, like how do you get over that as an organization? And can you do it can you do it just with partnerships? And maybe there's enough companies today that are willing to deal with the physical aspects, that want to partner so that they in tandem can go up against Amazon with these other folks, that'll end up working. But I don't know. It'll be interesting.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like, to your point, ultimately, if there's nothing to hold, if you're not a physical retail, legacy organization, to me, it seems silly to try and chase after Amazon and what they've already done really, really well. Whereas I'm like, if you would hit the gas pedal and really try to build coalitions against them and try to think about how we can, it's not, I don't think, again, I can't see the future. I don't see a world in which Google is like, we're a grocery store now.
Yeah.
We've acquired physical groceries, but, but that would be one way to do it. If they bought a bunch of grocery stores, like that's certainly an approach that
Yeah.
would be interesting. So I don't
Yeah.
know.
I don't know. When your whole business model is selling pictures on a website, man, running a retail store is
Yeah.
not fun.
Yeah.
So
I
I don't
can't
know.
imagine.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Kris, this has been great. Anything else that you think our audience would want to know?
I mean, I'm sure there's plenty, but not really that I could share with them. No, this has been great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, awesome. If people want to get a hold of you, connect with you, is there a good way to do that?
Yeah, you can probably the easiest way is on Twitter. It's just Kris McDermott on Twitter. I secured that about 15 years ago. So
Nice.
much to the dismay of a couple of old men in Ireland, it is mine. So yeah, feel free to reach out, and I'd love to chat.
All right, awesome. We'll put that in the show notes as well. Kris, thanks
Great.
so much for being on.
Thank you.
Thanks again for listening to another episode of eCommerce Deep Dive. Be sure to subscribe to your favorite podcast platform or on YouTube. And if you get a chance, go in and leave us a rating. It would help a lot. Thanks again, and talk to you soon.